All right. So it's 3 o'clock. Here at School Leader Lab, we do like to start on time. We know that there's going to be a trickle in, and we welcome the trickle. We know that folks are juggling a lot, and we're just super appreciative that all of you are joining us today. And just once again, thank you so much for uplifting spirits and sharing a quote that's been inspiring to you. As I said, we need to copy and save all these quotes so we can use them here at School Leader Lab. So we'll get started. Just a couple notes. We at the top, we're going to do a couple tech notes, but don't worry, we'll spend 99% of our day with Ayana Malone from Onyx. But we're so excited to have such a large group of people here today and to discuss like mental health and supporting staff. But we want this community, we want today to feel like a small session, and we want this to feel like a community. So that's why we're going to do a little bit of tech framing, because we can all use some human to human connection right now. I know I can. So thank you for helping us to make our face feel that way in advance. So to help us build more authentic connections, we'd just like to ask you to do a couple things. I see most of you have your video on. If you don't, could you just please turn on your video? And then if you could rename yourself to make sure you put your first and last name down and your preferred pronouns. And so the way you can rename yourself is to head to your picture. And then if you go to the top right corner, you'll see 3 dots and you can hit those. And then there's the option to rename. And so I'll do that right now. My name's Melissa Martin, and I'll rename myself with my pronouns, which are she, her, and hers. So folks could take a moment to do that as well. Thank you. And then finally, just so we can see as many faces as possible as we dive in and have conversation today, if you could just enter side-by-side mode and then drag the window over so you can see as many faces as possible while at the same time seeing the screen share. Great. Thanks so much. And then if you need any tech help, you can privately chat Stephen. So great. Thanks, Stephen. So we just like to highlight a couple engagement norms, once again, to keep to raise the community feel here. And I just like to voice over a couple of these. Just be present. We totally understand that folks have a lot happening. So if you need to step away, just turn off your video. And then when you turn, if you can turn it back on. We want this session to be really valuable to you, so own your own learning. Feel free to ask questions, use the chat. We will use some warm calls. We'll have some turn-in talks and some small group discussions, so we hope you'll dive in. And just extend grace. Obviously, we're all under incredible pressure right now in a time without precedent. We know we're all juggling a lot, so just give each other grace. For example, you might see or hear a small quarantine coworker of mine. I'll need your grace if that happens, and just extend grace to others. And then seek to understand. Once again, just ask questions. There's going to be a lot of great discussion, so feel free, like I said, to use the chat, ask questions, honor confidentiality. It's kind of like the Vegas rule. I think we all understand that one. And then I just like to make sure that we can agree to our engagement norms today by giving either a virtual thumbs up or a physical thumbs up. So great. I see a couple virtual thumbs up, physical thumbs up. Thanks. All right. Great. So we see, it's so nice to see a lot of old friends, and I'm also seeing a lot of new faces here, which is super exciting. So before we dive in, just like to share a little bit about who School Leader Lab is. So at School Leader Lab, our vision is exceptional and diverse leadership teams for every student. And we work to develop leaders in 3 main areas: instruction, leading adults, and disrupting anti-Blackness and systems of racism and oppression. And we do this work because we know that leaders are the lever to great schools for students, and that this kind of integrated leadership development is really critical for leaders. And one way that we're so fortunate to be able to support our leaders is to offer things like these speaker series. So once again, thank you so much for taking time out of your Thursday afternoon to join us. Just a little bit about me. I'm Melissa. I've been with School Leader Lab since July 2017. As I mentioned before, we have our awesome Stephen running tech. And then you'll see a lot of our other School Leader Lab team members here. If you're a School Leader Lab team member, if you could just give a wave. All of us at School Leader Lab really take our commitment to growth and our own constant learning seriously. So we're just really excited to learn alongside of you today. So thanks for letting us join you. So we'd just like to get to know a little bit more about all of you now that you've learned a little bit more about us. So if you could take a moment to please chat your name, your school, and your location, and then your answer to the following question. When in the last 3 months have you had a deep belly laugh, and what did it? So it's totally okay if you need to think about that question for a moment. So your name, your school, and your location, and your answer to when you last had a deep belly laugh, and what did it for you? And make sure it's something you wouldn't mind sharing with the group, because it'll be in the chat. Great, thank you. See the chat's coming through. So exciting to see people from Kansas City. We know we have some friends from South Carolina, definitely DC. Oh, I know, it's how lovely. Baltimore in the house. Oh, it's nice to see that people are finding ways to connect with their friends. See a lot of things about things their little people have done to bring them joy and laughter. So if you've typed, takes a moment to get all these to scroll through. Just go ahead and read what other people have shared. And I'm gonna do a warm call. So India from DCI, I'd love for you to share about this like TikTok that you and your daughter watched of her.
Hello, everybody. Hi, my name is India Finn. I work at DCI International here in Washington, D.C. And my daughter we were watching her TikTok feed because she was saying my feed was so boring. And so we were watching her feed. And, you know, if anybody knows, it's the song that the kids were saying about the bangs. So it was really funny, and the things that they find. You know, whatever brought her joy, but she really got into it, and I got into it with her. So it was good because I would never look at that, but it was good.
Nice. And what was the impact of having that deep belly laugh with your daughter?
It was a moment of connection, you know, sharing something common, you know, laughter is always good for the soul. So being able to spend that quality time with her, especially during these teenage years, is always valuable, especially with everything else that's going on.
Nice. And let's see, I'd love to hear from.
Thank you for calling on me.
Oh yeah, of course, India. Thanks for joining. And Chelsea, I'd love to hear from Meeting Street, the time with your 3-year-old nephew and the deep belly laugh, if you're willing to share.
Sure. My nephew, he's just the silliest little boy ever. He loves doing random dance moves. He loves putting on our shoes and walking around. Like, he just loves to make people laugh.
Oh, nice. And so what's the impact of you having that moment with your nephew? How'd that move you?
It just reminds me not to take life so seriously all the time and just enjoy the small moments.
Yeah. Well, just thank you so much, Indy and Chelsea, for being vulnerable and sharing your sharing out with the group. And thank you to everyone else for being vulnerable and just sharing a joyful moment that you've had with the rest of us. I think I agree. Like talking about joy and humor, it evokes like the human to human connection. So thank you for being vulnerable in this space. And go ahead, Stephen. Great, thank you. And so with that, as we have found moments of joy and laughter in these past 3 months. There's also been a lot happening in our country. And so here's a sampling of news headlines from the last 2 weeks. Our country is experiencing the impacts of 2 pandemics, COVID and systemic racism, specifically related to anti-Blackness. And we are incredibly stressed out. I know that myself, while I have had those belly laughs, I've experienced a range of emotions as a result of all that's happening. I think most often for me, I get anxious and worried about balancing like work and home. And I know that I often feel like I'm falling short in like both areas because there's so much happening. And last week I was at my in-laws in an unfamiliar neighborhood. I love my in-laws, but it was unfamiliar neighborhood. And I felt like I just had to be even more hyper vigilant about wearing a mask and social distancing in public because I was worried about what people might say about Asians or the Kung flu and all that's happening around that. So to make it through, I know I've often wanted to like pull the covers up sometimes. I've tried to like swallow feelings and operate as things are normal. So seeing these headlines for me really raises my anxiety. But at the same time, it's a gift because seeing these headlines make me realize that I really need to give myself permission to stop, slow down, and check in on myself and see how I'm really doing. Which brings me to this quote. And I'd love to have Rohini. Could you read the quote for us? Oh, okay. Melissa Nolan, would you mind reading the quote for us?
Sometimes you don't actually realize you're drowning when you're trying to be everyone else's anchor.
I know as leaders, we often feel like the anchors for others. And so it's really important that we check in on ourselves because emotions are contagious. And we need to remember that the adults who are in our schools are also living and experiencing these realities as well. So with that, our work together today is to think about how to build a strong community for adults. Because when we take care of ourselves and provide a space for adults to be humans, we're all able to show up for children and families in the way that we need to. So with that, I'd love to introduce you to Miss Ayana Malone from the Onyx Therapy Group. Excuse me. She started her career in special education as a special education teacher, and she spent a great deal of time exploring the efficacy of educational programs, successful teaching, and building school programs that transform environments to be responsive to students with a range of needs, identified or not. And as a teacher, trainer, mentor, recruiter, and evaluator, one of Ayana's strengths is being able to push teachers and staff to their greatest potential in serving children. She has advanced degrees in teaching and sociology, which allows her to skillfully blend psychology, systems analysis, and effective teaching strategy to meet the needs of organizations and schools. She had a career as a teacher and administrator in the charter sector and has also trained teachers with the DC Public Schools. Ayana is also deepening her pedagogy and skills as a doctoral student at Morgan State University. A believer in FAIRE, she thinks that education is the most direct route to freedom from oppression and generational poverty and to self-actualization. Through education and knowledge, Ayana believes that we all rise together. So I just want to say a heartfelt thank you to Ayana for joining us today and helping us grapple with how to best support the adults in our buildings. So thank you, Ayana.
Sure. Thank you, Melissa. I don't think I've ever heard that read out loud before. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel really special. I am so honored to be with you all today. I feel honored because you are taking the time to engage with me and go on a journey with me, right? So Melissa started talking about these dual pandemics, and really, I want you all to be engaged and think about what that really means, what that means for your staff, what that means for you as a leader or people on your leadership teams. We're going to be spending about an hour together. And just like the norms that Melissa talked about from School Leader Lab, I have the same ones. Unmute yourself, talk back to me. Please feel free to chat in the chat box. I will ask you questions that I hope you will chat back to me. Like Melissa said, there'll be a couple of virtual turn-in talks and a little bit of small group work, because this is more than just me speaking to you. This is a conversation. We are not going to progress beyond where we are right now as a country, as a society, as a community, until we have a conversation. So I am very excited that you have taken the time today to focus on a conscientious reopening of schools. And I use that word purposely because you're thinking beyond the just general logistics of, you know, Melissa, I was ear hustling when we were waiting earlier. You were talking about parents showing up to pick up laptops, right? Or teachers going to buy PPE. Those are all logistics that matter and make a lot of sense. But there is a human element to the reopening of schools that I'm just prayerfully hoping that people focus on and think about, and you take back to your leadership teams. So let's get into it. Here are the objectives. One objective that I did not write up here that I want you to know is that throughout our talk today, I'm going to be giving you 5 best practices, okay? There will be a slide at the end that has all of the best practices together, but I want you to keep your ears open for when I talk about a best practice, okay? So through all of our work, there are 5 best practices in terms of a conscious reopening of schools focused on identity affirmation, focused on mental health and hygiene for your staff that I want you to think about. When you walk away from here, you're going to have some action items. You're going to have some questions. You're going to do a little bit of processing with me in terms of the implications of these dual pandemics happening at the same time. You're going to be able to talk about how you can counteract the impact of what's going on in the world right now with staff who are just as frazzled, who are just as frustrated, who are trying to figure out how to make it all work, who are going to be on Zoom with their kids in the background. So like Melissa, if you hear my 3-year-old coworker making a lot of noise, pay no attention, he's fine. And then I want to talk about trauma-informed response, because I believe that is the best way to engage your staff as a leader, for you to be thinking about how I am going to wrap my arms around my staff so that we can get through this together, okay? So outside of the introduction that Melissa gave for me, I wanted to talk a little bit about, this is best practice number 1, okay? Perk up your ears. You need to know who you are and what you represent as a leader in order to do this work authentically, okay? So this is a space where I'm gonna need you to take the blinders off. I'm gonna need you to take the objective lens of a leader off and think about who you are. Think about what you represent. Think about what you want to represent. As you can see, I've done mine, and I have a very logical mind, so I did mine in a very logical way. Like, at the basis, who am I? I'm a Black Caribbean American woman. I am the Director of Training and Education for Onyx Therapy Group. That's what I do. It's not necessarily who I am and all I represent. I'm a doctoral candidate. It takes up a lot of my life, a lot of my time, and talks about what I've dedicated my life to. I'm a mother. I love to travel. I love to learn. Again, knowing who I am as a person. And most importantly to this work, I am finding my own path as an activist. When I think about allyship and accompliceship, which I'm going to talk about throughout this presentation, there was a time where I was very clearly an accomplice. I was out front, it was in the streets, I was protesting, you know, I was like, fine, go ahead and arrest me. My life has changed. I don't have that privilege anymore. So I am now looking for my own path to activism, and that is okay. And the reason I'm telling you this and sharing this best practice with you, because it's about transparency. When you are trying to build a conscientious culture in your schools, as a leader, there is a need for transparency. There is a need for people to be able to see you and see who you are and see what you represent, right? So for some of you, that is very easy. You wear your heart on your sleeve, you wear your t-shirt, you have your outward appearance, you are perfectly fine bringing all you are into your space. For others, it may not be as easy. So I'm going to ask my first question. What is difficult about bringing your whole true self into your school building? And anyone can answer. Again, please unmute yourself, or you can put it in the chat if you don't feel like talking out loud. Oops. What would you find easy about bringing yourself into your school?
I'll talk. Hi, everybody. I'm Adriana. And for me, the ease is kind of knowing who I am and coming in with kind of a vision on holistic wellness. But the hard part is being a manager, especially in the pandemic, of like holding expectations, but also trying to maintain a supportive environment. And so how do you do that in this boss role where before you want to like hang out with people and talk to them and like talk smack about other people, and now you have to like really hold certain structures in place and kind of ideas in order to move the mission forward.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. And that is real, right? We have an obligation as a leader to be an exemplar, to be a model, to appear as if we're holding everything together. But at the same time, we're thinking about the staff. It's just like Melissa's quote earlier, right? Like, you don't realize you're drowning when you're trying to be an anchor for your staff. So thinking about how you fit into that work is equally important. So I appreciate that level of transparency for sure. And hopefully by the end of our conversation today, you'll learn a couple of tricks around navigating that. Okay. So our terms, oh, I was already on the page. So here are some of the terms that I'm going to be using today. I have some definitions for you. I'm going to be talking about something called acute stress disorder. I'm going to be talking about anxiety, which is of course something you probably heard before, the dual pandemic. And I really, really enjoy the words racial reckoning. That is a fantastic way of characterizing what has been happening, right? Where it's just like, people are like, it just came out of nowhere. No, it didn't come out of nowhere, but it is a reckoning to be for certain. Compassion fatigue. When people are burned out, it's kind of the cost of caring. As educators, we feel that often, probably throughout our entire careers, and now we have 2 additional layers of compassion fatigue that we have to consider when we're talking about our staff and we're talking about our students. An ally. I'm not sure if everybody got a chance to take a look at some of the pre-materials. It wasn't required reading, but if you didn't, that's okay. But if you have time afterwards and you want to circle back to those 2 readings, they're really great readings about being an ally and being an accomplice and what the differences are. And I want to make very clear in our conversation that I do not judge if you are an ally or an accomplice. And I'll talk a little bit more about, you know, what those differences are, because having an ally is better than having avoidance, right? Having an accomplice is wonderful, but everybody cannot be on the front lines. But that's just a little bit about the difference between allies and accomplice, and then trauma-informed response, which we're going to talk about today. So as we warm up a little bit, I want to read something that I heard when I was on a project for the Equity Lab. Some people die quickly, others suffer long-term effects. A great many recover quickly, but all of us are affected. The sickness reaches all strata of society. No one is immune. There's no vaccine, there's no cure, yet there is knowledge of how to counteract the virus. But many choose not to sacrifice their own comfort for the greater good of society. In the chat box, please type 1 or 2 words of phrase of what did you think when I read that statement? What was I talking about when I read that statement? Prejudice and judgment. Ashley Cole, Ashley said, I feel like it could be said about anything. Structural racism, white supremacy, a problem that requires all of us to solve, sacrifices for the good of the community. And many of you hit the nail on the head when you said, I'm talking about COVID and I am talking about systematic racism and inequality. And it amazes me. Ooh, the slow burn of trauma. Erica Beale, very nice. It amazes me the parallels that we see and why many of us are choosing to call this a dual pandemic, right? Because the symptoms of the root cause of the underlying are really, they mirror one another, right? You know, some people, contract COVID-19 and they recover and they're okay. Some people don't make it. Some people suffer long-term effects, but nobody is immune to it. When I think about systematic inequality, when I think about structural racism, I think about it in the same way. And the part that got me most was the idea that some people, many people, are simply unwilling to sacrifice their own comfort for the greater good of everyone else. So whether you're talking about put your mask on, like it's just that simple. If my 3-year-old can put a mask on and go around Target in a mask, a grown-up can do it. But in the same time, when I talk about this racial reckoning, is it not the same idea? That there are many people who don't want to move themselves out of this comfort zone and instead ask questions about why are people angry? Why are people so upset? I don't understand. Well, if you just followed the rules, we've been following the rules for a very long time and it still has not worked out in our favor. So what do you mean follow the rules? Mm-hmm. So what I think is really amazing during this time, people talk about 2020 being just an awful year. It is, but I think there's also so much opportunity. There's so much life. There's so much change because these 2 pandemics have absolutely upended the way many of us think, the way many of us feel, what we know, and how we operate. And there is quite possibly the belief that things will never be the same after this year. That is an amazing thing to think about when you consider, the span of human history. And I'm sure there were many points in the span of human history, but we're in one right now, that after this year, things will probably never be the same again. I love the grocery store. That's going to transition me, okay? Best practice number 2. You cannot repair what you do not process. So I'm going to take you through 2 processing activities, okay? And I'm going to start by talking about my love of the grocery store. Seems very simple, right? I love Trader Joe's. I love Wegmans. I love farmers markets. I absolutely enjoy going to the grocery store. When I think about COVID-19, one of my favorite activities will not be the same. Maybe ever again. I don't know. I have hope, maybe ever again. So I want people to think about going to the grocery store before March of 2020 of this year, and then after March of 2020 this year. Can I get a volunteer? Somebody tell me, what was it like to go to the grocery store before March of 2020?
I'll share because I also too share a love of anything that has to do with shopping. So like the grocery store is it's a great experience for me. I love it. But before I could go, no mask off, I didn't feel guilty about like touching the vegetables and making sure I had the right tomato, the best avocado, best bag of grapes, best looking piece of cabbage. And now, walking around freely, going up any aisle. If I bumped into someone by mistake, I'd start a conversation and then we keep going. You see people you know and you hug them. That was before March.
That was
and the salad bar was open.
Let me tell you, Wegmans has the best salad bar, the best hot bar, but I'm not going to go too far down the lane. Exactly. Thank you so much, my dear, for sharing. So before, there was a level of spontaneity for me going to the grocery store. I'd literally be sitting around like, oh, let me just stop in its grocery store, right? There was a quick stop in and out. I could just run in and out of the grocery store. Like you said, charge up a lane, grab something, come right back. Open lanes, we're passing in aisles. You got me. The hot bar, there was a salad bar. There were samples. Do I have any other Costco lovers out there? Exactly. You go to Costco on Saturday morning, you need an entire meal. You could choose your own bread and rolls and, things like that. You could smile and talk to people. I always was chatting someone up in the grocery store, right? This was before. BC, before COVID, AC. So can someone tell me, what is it like to go to the grocery store now? Can I get another volunteer to talk to me? What is it like going to the grocery store now?
I want to jump in.
Mm-hmm.
This is Rebecca from Denver. And I took my daughter to Costco the other day because she had to get new glasses. And afterwards, I apologized to her in the parking lot because I was a freak. Every person that came near us, I was like, this person has COVID. And so, like numbers wise, there's like 500 people in the building, which here in Denver, that means that there were people with the virus around us. And just that anxiety I had was like so stressful, and definitely ruined the experience for her of getting new glasses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Exactly. So there are all sorts of things that we never had to think about before for something as simple as going to the grocery store. The reluctance to bring your kids. I pull out that cart. I carry the spray Lysol in my purse. So I am out in the parking lot spraying down the cart. I'm wiping it with Lysol wipes. Like it's, you think I was about to perform surgery out in the parking lot at Trader Joe's, right? Things are highly packaged. There's less choice. There's hidden faces. Have you guys thought about how wild it is to walk around and you cannot see the bottom of someone's face? And because of it's not commonplace in our society, because there are some places in this world where perhaps women wear hijabs, they might wear niqab. So not seeing someone's face is not as jarring. But for us, that is a very jarring thing. As someone who travels quite a bit, and if you travel quite a bit, there's one thing they always say they can tell why you're American. Who knows? One thing. Everywhere I go, they're like, oh, you must be from the States.
Because we smile at each other.
we're always smiling. We are always smiling. I will never forget when I went to Eastern Europe, I was in Russia, and people were like, what? You must be American, because Americans just smile. And it's not something I think we're conscious of. And it's not always, the full on, 32 teeth, but it's polite. You know that when you make that noise when you do it. But that's, and so with that gone, you don't know what you're looking at half the time. I find myself smiling under my mask, and then I realize, oh, nobody can tell that I just smiled at them, right? Another thing, few public restrooms, right? That's an accessibility issue that became very interesting to me. I have an aunt with MS in a wheelchair, and it brought up a whole new world of like, well, my gosh, she can't go many places. I think people are relaxing their restroom rules, but thinking about the limited access that comes from not having restrooms, from only having one door open versus multiple doors open, right? And I'm just talking again about the grocery store. These changes could literally be permanent, right? Anxiety producing. Let's keep going, because we're processing dual pandemics. So I want you to put a pin in that COVID, that anxiety, those masks, those, blank faces that we see with the mask. And then I want you to think about, shift your mind just quickly, about the racial reckoning that is occurring. One of my favorite quotes is by Malcolm X, and this is not a direct quote, this is a paraphrase of his quote, but he famously said, "Chickens always come home to roost." And when I think about some of the things that are going on in America right now, in the United States right now, I think about that quote all the times. Well, chickens do tend to come home to roost. Might take them a little while, but it happens. There are deep divides that, again, like our pre-COVID lifestyle to our post-COVID lifestyle, there are things that I truly believe are permanent. There are some divides that may never be bridged. And I'm not just being a negative Nancy here, I'm being a realist. When I think about the things that have happened, when I think about the lines that have been drawn, when I think about the stances that people have taken, when I think about even friends of mine who have been notably silent on many things, and I'm like, I don't know if we'll ever be friends again when something this big could happen and you've said nothing. I'm talking about serious dismantling that has happened, meaning, again, this is another space where our world will not be the same again. There are going to be 5 questions I'm going to post. Is there a difference between racism and anti-Blackness? How do you know when you're being genuine or when you're being performative? And what's the difference? May feel like, of course I know the difference. It's not always clear. Where do you fit in this landscape? When I think of this picture, this parallel between 1968 and 2020, and we could honestly go far, far further back than 1968 to see pictures just like this from the founding of America, 1619, right? From the first slave ships that hit the shore to 2020. The pictures have all been the same. Where do you fit in that landscape? How does your staff feel? Who is on your staff? Have you thought about that before? Have you thought about how the makeup of your staff? In a city like Washington, D.C., it may be very different than the staff makeup when my friend out here in Denver. It may not be the same. And what if you don't want to ask? What does that mean, right? What does that mean when you're like, I don't know if I want to know how someone feels? And this one, if I don't agree with a perspective, does that make me a bad person? These are 5 questions that I encourage many non-Black, Indigenous people of color to think about, to ask themselves. And if you are a Black person, a Black, Indigenous person of color, you can ask yourself those questions, maybe framed a little bit differently. But it really comes down to the box in the pink. Are you an ally or are you an accomplice? Are you the person who is supporting or are you a person who is on the front line? And there's no wrong answer to that question. Avoidance is the wrong answer. I'm pushing you past avoidance. I think if you were into avoidance, you wouldn't be here on this conversation with me today. So I am going to extend grace and give everyone the benefit of the doubt that you're falling into one of these 2 camps, an ally or an accomplice, and really having to dig into these particular questions. Where do you fit? Do you know the difference between racism and anti-Blackness? How do you feel if you're being genuine, if you're being performative? Have you thought about your staff and where they fall into these different camps? So I want to do a virtual turn and talk. I think Stephen is going to help break us out into groups of 3, and you are going to have approximately 7 minutes, because that'll give each person about 2 minutes of talk time in your group. And what I want you to do is talk about the question that gave you the most visceral reaction when it popped up on the screen. So what was the question that just made you go, whoa? Okay, and you're going to talk about it in your groups for about 7 minutes. Okay. So, all right. Welcome back. Welcome back, friends. And I want to do some, as Melissa said, some warm calling. So Rohini, we used to work together way back when in DC Bilingual. So I'm going to pick on you as a familiar face. You can get back at me later. But tell me, what was something that you all talked about in the chat in terms of, a question that just was really, that brought on that visceral response for you?
Yeah. Hi, Ayana. Good to see you. The first thing that we talked about was I mentioned that my strongest response was between the question between racism and anti-Blackness, that my knee-jerk response was like, yes, but also I can't name it. And then it then compounded, oh, do I really have a clear definition of what this looks like? And do I know how that manifests? So that gave the most immediate feels. Do you want us to share more, or?
Oh, no, that's fine, that's fine. I actually want to stick on that question for about 30 more seconds, because I think it's an important question. And so you can either give me a virtual thumbs up or thought, do people know the difference between racism and anti-Blackness? Because it is pretty important and can sometimes be a confusing distinction. You can also put it in the chat, if you have a thought as well. Would somebody like to share their thought? Oops. Oh, okay. Difference, I couldn't know if I could really. Right. So the delineation that I will encourage you to think about, and this is something that in my own personal research I have come across time and time again, is that racism is systematic, it's structural, it is an oppressive tool that, again, is systematic and it's structural. Anti-Blackness is different in that it's a feeling, it's a perception, it's a bias. You know, I think all the time of people who I have heard say, you know, I'm not racist, you know, I just think, you know, they always preface, I'm not racist. I just think people should listen when the police tell them to do something. I don't know if these people are racist or not, but what I can say about that statement is that is not actually a racist statement. It's an anti-Black statement, right? Because you're not necessarily actively, systematically shutting people out of housing markets, shutting people out of jobs, and you know the systematic inequality of which racism has been built. We're talking about a feeling. We're talking about perception. We're talking about, what do you see when you see me? What do you see when you see someone who is brown? What do you see when you see someone who is other? When you see someone who is non-white? When I think about the question, why do we have to celebrate Black History Month? Why do we have to celebrate Asian, you know, History Month? Why do we have to celebrate Women's History Month? Why do we have to celebrate Pride Month? Those aren't racist statements necessarily. They have more to do with your anti, and then fit that in there. Anti-minority, xenophobia, homophobia, because it's a feeling, it's a perception, because you're otherizing someone else. So it can be very hard to delineate, but I think it's an important question to ask when you're saying, well, I'm not racist, but, or you hear someone else say, I'm not racist, but, and that's when you can step in and say, well, let me explain to you what the difference is. And that perhaps you have not made a racist statement, but you have certainly made a statement of anti-Blackness or anti-gayness or again, you can put in whatever you're talking about in that categorization, but it's important to know that one is structural, one is objective, one is something that has been built over time, and the other one is a feeling, it's a perception, it's a bias. It's what do you conjure up when you see me, when you see my face, when you see my skin, when you see my hair, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a lot to unpack. And so I don't want to get mired in that, but I often have found in these conversations that delineating it is important. So let's keep going. So we have all endured these things. And so you can look through the chart here on the PowerPoint, but there's something that I absolutely want to talk about is, you know, kind of the politicizing of so many different things, as well as listening to things through the media. I truly believe our heart rates would drop significantly if we did not have so much coming at us from these outside sources all the time. It's important, it's necessary. I'm not saying to get rid of it. I'm not saying ban TikTok. And I'm like, how are you going to ban something when you're so pro First Amendment? But whatever, that's not what I'm here to talk about. But what I can say is that our stress levels go up when everything becomes so politicized, right? When, you know, we are thinking about, you know, birthday parties. I had multiple friends turning 40 this year. I had a trip to Brazil planned. Another friend was going to Belize. Another friend was going to Puerto Rico, all to celebrate their 40th birthdays. We didn't go anywhere, right? You know, people didn't have their weddings. People, you know, kids didn't graduate. You know, when you think about all of those things and how they have been politicized, you know, when you think about how, you know, Black Lives Matter, when you guys were in the chat, we were talking about how Black Lives Matter has become this like political statement, you know, when perhaps the origins were not a political statement, but it is definitely now a polarizing political statement. And where, you know, you kind of test people, you know, you say Black Lives Matter and you wonder what they're going to say back, right? You know, we have been, that last bullet, forced to look at reality in a new way because of both of these pandemics, because COVID has absolutely become politicized because racial reckoning was already going to be politicized, and that happened at the exact same time, almost the exact same time. Isn't that interesting how the universe works? So when you think about yourself, when you think about your staff coming back into your school buildings, coming back virtually, maybe a hybrid of both, these things have happened to them, right? We have experienced all of this, and it has led to something significant, and it's called anxiety, right? People are shredded. You know, I think about how impressive it is that more people are not curled up in a ball, you know, just shaking all the time. I think Melissa said it best earlier when she was like, you just want to get into bed and cover your head, right? You just want to get under the covers. When you're restricted from where you can go, you're restricted from the things you can do. You're worried about your family, you're worried about your friends, you're worried about, you know, police response. You're worried about so many different things. We're worried about the election in November. What happened to the mailbox? Where did it go? You know, like when you think about all of these things, like people are dredging up these levels of emotion that are unprecedented. Again, I work for Onyx Therapy Group. Our therapy waiting list is 180 people long. We have 17 counselors on staff. Our 17 counselors have full caseloads, and our waiting list is still over 180 people wanting therapeutic services. If that is not a clear indication of people struggling to keep their heads above water, people struggling, if you don't have a job or you have financial insecurity, where are you taking your kids back to daycare? Are you sending your kids back to school? You know, that is creating an amalgam of emotion that's just huge. That is powerful. And so there are some precursors along the way, right? There's burnout, there is vicarious trauma, there's compassion fatigue, which I talked about. But really, I want you all to think about something very specific when you're considering your staff, okay? And that is a condition called acute stress disorder. So acute stress disorder is a condition, and it's when people experience a trauma. The first 6 months after they experience that trauma, they are in a place of acute stress disorder, right? They are frazzled. They can't stop reliving it. You know, one of the things that really got to me, and I don't spend a lot of time on social media, and it still got to me, was re-witnessing the death of George Floyd over and over and over again. The media, they weren't doing people any emotional and mental favors. I get why it happens, because you want people to see it. You want people to confront the truth with their eyes, their hearts, their thoughts, their feelings, their emotions. But at the same time, that takes a toll on us, where you're constantly reliving a trauma, right? People are sad, you know, their mood is low, you know, they couldn't get married, you know, they couldn't attend someone's funeral, you know, they couldn't go on their annual family vacation to, you know, wherever, the King's Dominion, wherever they go. People experience these hurt feelings, these stressors, this anxiety, and it needs to be addressed, right? Now, as a school leader, I'm not saying that you have the ability to address everything universally, right? But this is your next best practice, okay? Remember, we're on 3. You need to recognize, you need to observe, and you need to make space for grace, okay? So when you get back to your buildings, and you're getting people back together for Summer Institute, your trainings, or maybe you're doing it virtually because you can see it in a virtual space as well. I want you to recognize what people are going through, what they look like, how they're speaking, their comportment, their affect. You have to be able to recognize it. You have to be, and I'll give a shout out to the sociologists out there, observe without judgment, right? Because you're giving people grace to be who they are. You have to analyze what you're seeing, because it is important that through these first 6 months after a traumatic event, that it is being addressed, that things are being addressed. People are being allowed to process. People are being allowed to see. People are being allowed to speak. People are being allowed to express how they feel. Because if they don't, it turns into an actual clinical diagnosis. And many people are familiar with PTSD or adjustment disorder. What's important, and I've done a lot of research around acute stress disorder in children, because often in special education, I have found that what you see and what's manifested is actually a manifestation of trauma versus an actual disability. But so in my research about acute stress disorder, what I have noticed time and time again is if there is an intervention, people are far less likely to end up in a clinical space of post-traumatic stress disorder and adjustment disorder. We might get there, folks, right? There's going to be a lot of people who are out there fully traumatized from COVID, from the fear and anxiety around Corona, from the racial reckoning, from feeling that oppression, and that oppression that is interestingly and intricately wound into COVID-19. I am sure all of you have seen, who have heard, and may have done your own research about how communities of color are suffering far greater effects from COVID-19. And it's directly related to the inequalities in healthcare, to inequalities in response, to access to healthcare, to access to testing, to performing low-wage jobs that did not have the option from working at home, so they're still out in the public. It's still connected, right? And so when you're returning to be with your staff, take this step. There are the logistics, which are important, which I said at the top of this conversation. How are you going to do virtual learning? How are the kids going to progress? How long is this going to happen? But I want you to also take that time to think about it in a conscientious way, a mental health space. What are people avoiding? Emotional dysregulation is one of my favorite clinical terms. When people often say, you know what, she's just acting crazy, that is emotional dysregulation. It's not acting crazy. That means there's so much boiling inside of you. It's like a toddler, right? There's so much boiling inside of you. You don't know what to do, so it just all explodes everywhere. And they're snapping, they're rude, they're aggressive, high absenteeism, feeling overwhelmed, so they just don't do tasks. You might have people who come back on your staff who are feeling all of these ways and might not recognize that they are truly in an acute disorder space, or they have moved over into PTSD or adjustment disorder space, right? So acute stress disorder is not a clinical diagnosis. Again, that is a time for intervention. But please still recognize when people are in a DSM space, diagnostic manual for diagnosing mental illness, that's what DSM is, recognize when people get there as well. That is one of your best practices as a leader, that you're able to see, so-and-so is not functioning in their daily activities. When we started this in March, we had online classes where teachers didn't show up. The kids would be in the classroom, but the teacher wouldn't be there. And you're like, well, where is so-and-so today, right? They're avoiding. They don't want to be a part of it. or they're overwhelmed. They're at home with their own kids trying to figure out what they're going to do. It turns into a permanent diagnosis. So in the chat, I want you to, again, please feel free, put some words up there, put some thoughts up there. You know, if you have returned to school, you know, have you seen some of these things from your staff? If you haven't returned yet, or you haven't started your summer training, what are you worried about seeing from your staff? So yes, let's go back to the chat. I want to hear from some folks. Overwhelmed, fatigue. Oh, Erica, this is not the year for performance improvement plans. It's the year for him. I love that. I love that, Erica. When we'll get to talking about, you know, creating safe spaces and brave spaces, but this is not the year, you know, for performance. It is a year to extend grace to people. We are all struggling. And if people are not struggling, I'm equally concerned. So if someone comes and tells you they're not struggling, please be equally concerned. Avoidance, concentration, managing emotions. Yep. I recently, you know, took my son out to this place. It's called Wilson's Point. It's like a little dock. And, you know, we were sitting there looking at the water, and an elderly Caucasian couple, you know, walks up, and he's holding like this bag, and it's got McDonald's. And so kiddo was like, oh, McDonald's, you know, so he sees the McDonald's bag. And so the gentleman like went to offer him some French fries. And I about jumped up, grabbed my child, and jumped in the lake, right? I was like, oh. And for multiple reasons. First, it was like Corona, like you giving my baby Corona fries. And then secondly, I'm like, why does this white guy think I can't buy my child some French fries? Like, why are you offering me French fries? But what was important about the range of emotions I experienced around some seemingly kindly elderly gentleman offering my kid, who was like McDonald's, because that's what kids do when they see that big M, right? A French fry or two. I had to recognize my emotional response may not have been apropos to the situation, right? And what was funny, it was both things, you know, it was both and. It wasn't either or. It wasn't like, oh, this man might be sick, but it was also like, why do you think I need your French fries? You know, and a whole situation came out around something so simple. So it's interesting how that emotional dysregulation, you know, can come from several different places. Perhaps if you're not a Black, Indigenous person of color, you may have experienced a reaction as such, right? You may have been somewhere and, you know, somebody, you know, you accidentally bumped into somebody, or you got a little too close and somebody gave you a look like, not today, don't try it, you know, or, you know, and you may have been like, well, gosh, I don't know what I did. You know, like we're all in this emotional space. So those are very good ones. Loss and grief, Jordan. I am going to call on you, Jordan, because I would love for you to talk about, you wrote something about loss. And so please let me know, like, talk to me about what you meant about loss.
I think just looking at how complex grief and loss are, and like the current state of the world and the change and transition that we're going through, literally hour by hour, not even day by day, but like minute by minute, it feels like that's a type of loss. And we're almost having to learn how to grieve that, because like typically when you grieve, there's kind of like a breakdown of function because you have to like process, right? But like we're almost not allowed to do that because we have to keep going. And so like it's exhausting to figure out how to grieve like the current process that we're all a part of.
And no, thank you for sharing that, because what's important about that is your staff is going through their own grieving and loss process as well. we've all lost something in this process. We might have lost our freedom. We might have lost people. We might have lost so many different things that we're grieving. We don't see the same. You can't be with your friends. You can't be with your family. And think about that. Like, how do you work through that as a school leader? Well, I'm about to talk a little bit about the how. Trauma-informed response. So trauma-informed response is an offshoot of the entire movement around trauma-informed care, which you probably heard about and heard of, especially in educational spaces. But what's important about response is that it's an action, right? And so there's your next best practice. Best practice 4, you have to act as a school leader. Apathy, avoidance, ignoring, pretending, powering through is not going to work. Okay, your staff will fall apart before your eyes. You may fall apart before your eyes. You have to act. So when I talk about acting, I am talking about acting through this trauma-informed response, because just like Jordan shared with us, we have all gone through a loss. We are grieving something. It could be something as small as how we went to the grocery store. It could be something as large as we've lost loved ones, right? There's a lot of gray space, a lot of space in between. So when you think about how you respond in a trauma-informed way, it's about safety. And yes, there is an element of physical safety that you have to provide, and that's going to be through your PPE, et cetera, et cetera. But there's also emotional safety that you have to create. Trust and transparency. So that exercise at the top of the hour where I was talking about myself in a transparent way, where I am on my journey, your staff needs to see that. What are you setting up for your staff to support themselves, to support each other? Mutuality and bearing witness. This one I think is so important. I want you to walk away from this. Melissa, I will send you an outline of these slides so you can post it later. Bearing witness is something as easy, just listening, listening to people talk, listening to people emote, not backing away from it, not being afraid of it, because you're bearing witness to what they've experienced. Empowerment through choice. Many of you as educators understand how important it is to give your students choice. Don't forget, you have to give your staff choice as well. One of the things that my school did is that we didn't have online classes on Friday. We worked a 4-day week. The staff voted on it. I don't think our ED was, particularly thrilled, but we gave that choice because people feel empowered when they can choose. And you're going to acknowledge these factors that make people who they are, these cultural contexts. It takes purposeful planning, right? And so what I have given you is a tool for purposeful planning. So I think Stephen is going to drop it in the chat box. It's a 3-point planning tool, and it is for students, staff, and families. And so, as you know, I'm talking about staff today. On September 16th, I'll be talking about students, and then families will just be your bonus. So you can take this form, you download it, you keep it for yourself, okay? And so when you go to the form, we're going to do a little breakout again. When you go to that form, I want you to look at the staff questions, okay? Look at the staff section. And it's going to, there's questions there for you to think about as you plan your reopening, as you plan your summer institute. Are those things there? Are those things in place? So I think we're going to go into a small group breakout again with the planning tool, because I just told you to implement trauma-informed response. You're probably saying, how? This is how, okay? Once you download it, yes, you can type into it. Okay, so Stephen, breakouts. Okay, I think we should only do, we might have to cut it a little bit short with the breakout. So could we do like 7 minutes instead of 10? Okay, thank you. Hi, welcome back, everyone. Welcome back, welcome back. So as I close out today, I want to say, I hope everyone took a look at the tool, and that everyone thought about that staff section and they thought about the questions that they can take back to their leadership team in terms of planning a conscientious reopening. Thinking about moving out of the objective space into the subjective space. I want to talk about the two spaces that need to be created in your school, right? The brave spaces and safe spaces. We hear a lot about safe spaces, but I challenge you to put into this best practice number 5, the last best practice, and it's make the brave choice. Choose bravery. You are still responsible for creating safe spaces in your schools, right? But I want you to be able to look at this and understand the difference between a brave space and a safe space, right? Safe spaces make us feel comfortable. There tend to be affinity spaces, right? They're places that like people can go and feel comfortable, etc. They're for inner growth. They're for inner healing. They're for connecting with others who are like them. You also need to create a brave space. A brave space forces you out of your comfort zone into a place of growth. When you think of a safe space, you think of an affinity group. A brave space is a non-affinity group, right? It forces you to acknowledge others. It's bringing more people together. And it's about moving agendas and moving mountains. So it doesn't require a cape. It's not hard. It's a space that allows people to speak passionately, to listen to one another, to process like we processed earlier in this, and allow people the grace to grow. This space should be sustainable, respectable, and led by you as the leader. And so please note, here are the 5 best practices so that you have them. But this is also my contact information. If you have any questions, we didn't really get to debrief the planning tool. So if you have questions, you can feel free to email me here to talk about the planning tool, or if you have some other thought or some other question that I was not able to address during our conversation. I am always willing, very open door. And I encourage you to think about those 5 best practices as you go back into your schools, as you re-engage with your staff. I feel like y'all are ready, like Tiffany Haddish says, she ready, y'all are ready, but keep it in the forefront of our minds while you're battling the idea of logistics and, pushback in government and district, et cetera, okay? Keep your staff and keep yourselves mental health at the forefront. And thank you all for your time and attention today. Melissa, I'll turn it back over to you. I will stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Ayana, for joining us today and leading us through such a great session. I learned a lot. I'll keep those 5 points are definitely ones to stick with. I'm still thinking a lot about the grocery store. I'm still stuck on the grocery store. So hopefully folks can stick with us for like one more minute. We have a couple things. One, we will send out a follow-up email with the recording and the materials from this session so you have them. Just a note, School Leader Lab, we'd love for you to stay connected if you're not as familiar with our work already. Here are a couple ways that you can stay connected. We hope you will join us for part 2 of this session where we talk about students with Ayana on September 16th. And then we also have an upcoming opportunity for urban teachers who are alumni. We're forming a teacher leader cohort. It's our 2nd year of partnering with the urban teachers. So you all are amazing leaders. If you are an urban teacher alum yourself or know of one who would make an excellent teacher leader for this cohort, head to our website and nominate them or fill out the application yourself. And also just keep in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And we hope that you enjoyed our session, and we value feedback. So we do have a survey we'd like you to take a few minutes to fill out. So please give us your feedback, and thank you again for joining us.